Thank you very much, Dr. Teruel. That's too flattering. And thank you all for being here. This is going to be a bit of a déjà vu because I'm going to speak about the same play that we spoke about yesterday in the interview. I had been thinking about this paper this summer because I had the privilege of attending this play. I mean, it's been, as I'll read in a moment, it's been a really important version of translations. I don't mean that the one in the National Theatre is not really important, because it's also very important. But in this case, because it's the first time of many things, it was really important. So I missed the one at the Lyric Theatre in Belfast just for a couple of days. But I went to Dublin to the Abbey Theatre. And then I also had the privilege of interviewing the director about these plays. And you'll have here many of her opinions and the reason backing her decisions for the things that we are going to speak about. So even though I'm committing the sin of repetition, I'm going to explain again a bit of Brian Friel and a bit of the play before going into the matter of this version. So Brian Friel was a Northern Irish playwright determined by his place of origin. His dramatic oeuvre, comprising over 30 plays, more than 30 plays, is intimately rooted in his community, from which he dissects human behavior at both the most personal and the most overtly social levels. Using the fictional village of Ballybeg on the Donegal coast as its particular ecosystem, the author reflects on universal aspects such as language and its capacity to help or hinder human communication, its use as a means of manipulation, and its indissoluble link with the culture and personality of a people. Translations was the first play by the company he founded with Belfast-born actor Stephen Ray, Field Day. It premiered in Derry in 1980 and deals with the cultural and linguistic confrontation that British colonization brought to Ireland. Since its premiere, it has become a classic of Irish theatre, one of the most performed plays on Irish stages and one of the most toured plays abroad, and part of the repertoire of the Irish and British national theatres. And we've even had 2 versions in Spain. Yet surprisingly, it had never been performed on Belfast's most popular stage, the Lyric Theatre, and had never been directed by a woman in Friel's own country. It had been directed by Gary Haynes in the US, but never in Ireland. So this play by the Belfast Lyric Theatre and Dublin's Abbey Theatre is therefore the first time of many things. It's the first co-production between these 2 great companies, the first time that a woman, Caitriona McLaughlin, artistic director of the Abbey Theatre, has directed translations in Ireland, and the first time that a woman has held this position at the Abbey in 30 years. This article aims to analyze the originality of her approach to the play, which premiered at the Lyric in May 2022, transferred to the Abbey in June, and has been touring to different cities in the north and south of the island for the rest of the summer. Translations takes us back to 1833, when the main language was still Gaelic, and the village, instead of Ballybeg, as later appears, was called Bala-Beag in Gaelic. The Ordnance Survey was sent from the metropolis to produce an accurate map of the country with the place names standardized, that is, translated into English, to avoid confusion both for the army and the landowners, who of course were not the natives. The English sappers, under the command of Captain Lancy, arrive in the village accompanied by Lieutenant Yoland and by a native of Bala-Beag, Owen, recruited in Dublin, who will act as a translator. This young man turns out to be the son of Hugh, the village schoolmaster, and this schoolmaster teaches children and adults in a typical Irish hedge school. They were called like that because at that time they were paralegal. They had been illegal. Education to the Catholics was illegal. So they had to hide. That's the reason for being called hedge schools. But this takes place in a barn owned by Hugh. Okay, so in the village, only the teacher, Hugh, and his two sons, one is Owen and the other is Manus, the firstborn, who helps him with the classes and looks after him, speak English. They are the only ones who speak English. And the rest of the village, they only speak and understand Gaelic. The lieutenant surrenders to the local charms, including that of young, and this is something I said yesterday, this is young Myra in this version. In Ian Rickson's version, she was called Moira. And this is because there is a discussion in Donegal about the name. So sometimes some people call it Myra and some other people call it Moira. And in this version, it was called Myra. All the times that I've seen translations before, it was Moira. Well, doesn't really matter. But she reciprocates his love, the Yolan's love, even though neither of them speak the other's language. This love story will be the source of tragedy because, well, Yolan disappears. We assume at the hands of the Donnelly twins. And these Donnelly twins were the representatives of the anti-English guerrilla of the time. That is a proto-provost, if we are thinking about the time of the Troubles. And because of this, the British Army threatens evictions, burning the fields, and exterminating the village livestock if it does not appear. So the play concludes with Hugh, the master, reflecting aloud on the end of Gaelic culture and the need to find his place in the new territory. Friel wanted to emphasize that his play is not about Irish peasants oppressed by the English army, but about language and languages, and about the impossibility of translating everything, about what is lost and corrupted by translation. And as Robert Welch explains, about the cultural class that originates in colonial processes, and quote, translations embodies an awareness of cultural differences and the tragedies and violence they generate. It is an unsentimental analysis of the politics of language. The director, Caitriona McLaughlin, was born in Donegal, where most of Friel's plays are set. And this, she claims, makes her feel an intimate connection with translations, and quote, as a Donegal native, I also feel that the play is about me. I see myself as of these people Friel is exploring, as she mentions in the program. She is currently the artistic director of the Abbey Theatre, but was previously the associate director at the same theatre between 2017 and 2020. Her background was, in fact, in science, although in 2003 she began working as a theatre facilitator with young people in Northern Ireland, working on conflict resolution. Her first encounter with Friel's playwriting was when she directed The Enemy Within, one of Friel's lesser-known plays in 2021, produced by Anne Grianan Theatre in Letterkenny, Donegal. As she herself acknowledges in the program, Translations was a play she had wanted to direct for over 25 years for a number of reasons, including the depth of the text and the richness of the internal lives of the characters, which makes the play so engaging for actors. She chose the play as a part of her first program as an artistic director of the Abbey Theatre because, in her opinion, it is an important play about identity. An Irish identity can be described as in flux at the moment. The director also highlights the play's topicality. The centenary of the partition of Ireland is this year, 2022. Although the ultimate proof of its greatness would be found for her in the resonance it has with current political situations around the world. And you'll see how topical these words are. And quote, oppressed people across the globe are being invaded, eroded, and erased by neighboring states with imperial imperatives, keen on regime change and on the removal of national and cultural identity. It rings familiar. End quote. McLaughlin sees a parallel between 1833, the year in which the play is set, and 2022, because once again, Ireland, and indeed the whole world, is on the cusp of change. And the dialectic between resistance or change affects us now as it affected these characters in the 19th century. There are a number of features in this production of the play that make it remarkable. The set design, being one of the most striking. McLaughlin has worked with set designer Joanna Parker, but the main details of this expressionistic set have to be attributed to the director. The set represents the hedge school, but instead of a flat floor, there is a slope. I'm not very happy with the photograph because you can't see it properly, but it's a big, very big slope, right? It's covering almost the whole set. And that makes the characters ascend and descend as they come on stage. Every time they come on stage, they ascend and then descend. It's a very curious effect. She believes that this gives the impression of an outdoor school, but also, and more importantly, that by using the slope, she can bring the landscape of Donegal, which is, as she said, rarely on flat ground, to the stage. And at the same time, to endow the place with an epic air that related to the Greek space, simple and empty, in line with the linguistic concerns addressed in the play. Another very notable aspect of the set design is the use of an ominous plumb line. This thing here that is hanging, this is a plumb line hanging from the ceiling, which gradually descends as the plot unfolds until at the end, it drops abruptly onto the desk that marks the master's position in the school. McLaughlin justifies the symbol on its similarity to a warhead. You look at it, it really resembles a warhead. And simultaneously, its usefulness for map making. Remember that this play is about map making maps, changing names. In her view, the British Army had conquered the world with its scientific tools, and therefore this machinery was dangerous. She wanted it to hover menacingly over the stage, both because the stage itself could be seen as a map, but also because the plumb line could be seen as a sword of Damocles over the Irish language and culture. Its similarity to a wrecking ball about to thoroughly destroy the habitat of these people is described in this way by the director, end quote. What worked really well for us was that kind of slow, oppressive descent. It seemed to cross the space, seemed to cross something under it, rather than accidentally fall and destroy, end quote. Regardless of the relevant additions that can be found in the set design, the most outstanding aspect of this version is, in my opinion, the change of focus effected on the characters. By this, I mean that the overall impression felt by the audience is that the female characters here are essential, while the relevance of the main characters is diminished, or, as will be seen in the case of Hugh, the schoolmaster, the image they convey is altered from what has been traditionally portrayed. This is achieved, as will be seen, through two strategies that subvert established readings of this play. Translations features three female characters, Bridget, Moira, and Sarah. Sorry, in this play is Myra. Bridget is a minor character, a village girl who acts as a comic counterpart to Doherty, a village boy. Sarah is a girl who cannot speak and is taught by Manus, with whom she is in love. This one is Sarah. This character is given a very careful treatment in this version of the play. The interaction between her and Manus, when he is teaching her to speak at the beginning of the play, is done slowly and minutely, with Sarah in frontal position and with a very vivid and attentive display of her struggles, her shyness, and her love for Manus. She's one of the most conspicuous characters on stage, even though she is silent most of the time, but she has a very powerful body language. In addition, although she cannot speak, she sings a song at the end of the first act, a compelling way to enhance this character. In fact, as can be seen in the interview, this character stirred a deep reflection in the director. McLaughlin resents the received idea that as Sarah cannot speak, she must be simple, and decides to make her brilliant at maths. This is taken from something that is said in the play about if she understood the sums, and to give her a very vivid internal life that nobody has access to. Moreover, she uses this character to open the play by relating the reason why Sarah cannot speak to the different reasons behind the lack of communication in Ireland today, such as the inability to speak because of being from another country. This led her to think about the relationship between Arab culture and Ireland today because of the immigrants, which prompted her to cast an Egyptian-Irish actress, Susie Siwaife, in the role, and to provide her with a song in Arabic, because the song is not in English or Gaelic, it's in Arabic, by a Libyan singer. In fact, the slogan used in the production, a sentence uttered by Owen to Yolan, "You can learn to decode us," insists on the idea of opening the play to the different cultures arrived in Ireland in recent years. As the director says, and quote, "A lot of new people are coming in and identify as Irish and changing the fundamentals of the culture. And every individual you meet, you need to decode. And Sarah represents someone you need to decode." It's a sort of comment about that, but also about Ireland being a place that can be decoded, end quote. However, María seems to be the most relevant character in this production. As with Sarah, the significance of the character is seen in the detailed focus on her facial expressions and body language, which makes her a more prominent presence than the original text might suggest. The love scene between her and Yolan is a beautiful display of non-verbal communication and understanding despite the different languages. The ending underlines her contradictory feelings, her need to move on and progress, represented in her decision to emigrate to America and thus to learn English, while at the same time remaining there at the Bellevue school, because it is where Yolan was happiest and it is the place where he would return to. María also features a song in this production, which she sings alongside Sarah in the style of sean-nós, a traditional form of singing without musical accompaniment, which was composed for the show. The director used the songs as a way of conveying the inner life of these women, since in the play, it is the men who do the talking, and as she expresses, end quote, women are often, particularly in conflict situations, the silent victims, end quote. However, if there was any doubt about the importance given to this character, she is the face of the show, the poster, the teaser, and all the publicity photos used in the press and on social media. The director gives several reasons for this, the main one being the idea of foregrounding the women in the play, but also because of traditional representations of Ireland as a woman. And she says, Kathleen Ní Holohan represents Ireland. Roisin Dobb represents Ireland. All these beautiful, dark, unavailable women. So I thought she, María, represents Ireland, end quote. To this, she adds the powerful gaze of the actress, since in McLaughlin's opinion, Zara Devlin, the actress, Zara Devlin's eyes are very alive. And you can see here, I'm comparing the National Theatre presentation of the play, and you can see Hugh as the face, and the Abbey Theatre is María, right? That's Zara Devlin. Thus, if on the one hand, Sarah and María are highlighted, on the other hand, Hugh is desacralized in relation to previous representations of the character. The school teacher in Friel's voice is Friel's voice in the text, in the play, or more accurately, Steiner's. since most of what he says is taken verbatim from George Steiner's 1975 book, After Babel. This makes the character's expressions complex to understand in most cases, and perhaps because of this, there is a tendency to invest him with respectability, which would be, in my opinion, contrary to what the author intended. Friel portrayed Hugh as a drunken and irresponsible father. On the one hand, to avoid easy identification of the audience with the character, and on the other hand, because he is the shaman, the character of the artist. At the same time, and because of this, he's narcissistic and self-centered. The anthropologist Turner's definition of a shaman, of the archetype of the shaman, can be applied to this character, and quote, exceptionally liminal thinkers, poets, writers, religious prophets, possessed by the spirits of change before changes become visible in public arenas, end quote, which is what Hugh denotes, a clear vision of the need to adapt to the new culture that he could see was emerging. But Friel was always wary of the blunt exposure of his ideas. He didn't want to seem preachy. So he strove to create an artistic distance from such characters by making them either despicable or laughable. The figure of the shaman, though endowed with the wisdom to see beneath the surface, is also riddled with confusion, incapable of action, and more often than not, an alcoholic. McLaughlin emphasizes Hugh's alcoholism because she believes that alcohol represents the character's flaws. In her view, alcohol plays a major role in rural Ireland as an inhibitor of capacity. And in isolated places, such as the one we see in this play, brilliant minds with learning had no possibility, in contrast with much less able men with access to technology and sophisticated implements that allowed them to conquer the world, end quote. The director, by depicting the character's inebriation on stage, has stripped him of excessive dignity and gravitas and shown him clumsy and drunken in all his interventions, often provoking in the audience a mixture of hilarity and compassion. This version of translations is, in my opinion, more comical than previous ones. And I'm mentioning these that I've seen, but I've also seen the National Theatre after that. And I also, I keep my idea that this one, Caitriona McLaughlin's version, is more comical. One gets the feeling that the director is also wary of the seriousness and respectability with which both Brian Friel and the play are viewed, especially in Ireland, where he is like a totem. Perhaps because of her birthplace, Donegal is neither in the south nor in Northern Ireland, which may give her the special vision of the outsider, a trait she shares with Friel. Perhaps because she is a woman, perhaps because of the many previous productions of the play, she transmits the sense that while being completely faithful to the text, she has subverted established readings of a play that is probably the most studied in contemporary Irish theatre by scholars around the world. Regardless of the multiple layers of meaning that can be found in translations and the significant impact it soon received from the academic world, Friel's intention with this play might have been closer to McLaughlin's production if we take into account his own idea of the use of comedy in his plays, borrowed from playwright Brendan Behan, and quote, "You keep the people laughing in a theater for 5 minutes, and then in the 6th minute, when they're helpless laughing, you plug your message, if you want to plug a message," end quote. Moreover, Friel's next play with Field Day, The Communication Chord, was a farce, written in response to the way he had been pigeonholed with translations, as can be seen when, in an interview with Fintan O'Toole, he acknowledges his discomfort at the way the play has been treated. So O'Toole asks him, "Were you aware of almost being canonized with translations?" And he answers, "Oh, not at all. Oh no, that's very strong. but it was treated much too respectfully, end quote. Besides the ironic reading of you, there is no denying that this version following the text to the letter is not only the most gender egalitarian, a reading in which Caitriona McLaughlin is attuned to the new sensibilities of Irish society across the island, but also a tolerant and inclusive showcase of contemporary Ireland, something that was in fact an important factor in her decision-making as a director. And I quote, "I think it's important as a national theatre to think about the message you're sending out, and to put up a very traditional version of translations and Irish theatre is exclusive. And that's the last thing we want to be. And that's the last thing that play is." So thank you very much for your attention. This is Friel.
Thank you, Maria. That was great. We're perfect with time, so perhaps we can use 10-15 minutes for discussion of the papers if you feel so inclined, or if you have any questions to the members of the panel.
Thank you all. Very interesting papers there, so thank you for that. Just to pick up really on Maria's point then about the message, one thing that sort of struck me that was relating all your papers together was the extent to which a play has to have a message and it's telling the audience one thing. And I was interested that, Vicky, you were talking about how well, it seemed to me from what you were saying that Fogarty was trying to put in her schoolgirl adaptations a fairly authentic representation of the original text, and it seemed to be more within the actors and the audience to make the link to the contemporary situation and the arguments about women. Whereas, Sarah, when you were talking about Wonderland, which I did see at the National, and I agreed with these reviews, very underwhelmed by the whole thing, but that's personal opinion. And I think partly because it was so didactic, and maybe I was too old, though I think I went with one of my daughters where she'd have been about 19 then, and she was similarly underwhelmed. I think that it was trying to force the message too much. So really the question is to think about how much in doing an adaptation or reworking do you have to have a message, and how much you can change the original. You've really answered a lot of that, but it was just linking all the papers through that point. That was what I was asking.
Thank you, Janice, for the question. Just a comment. I do think that even if it's just an adaptation because you are selecting a certain passage, Miguel knows more about translations as well because he translates a lot. And I remember that you told us during the degree how the translator has to be careful when translating a text in order not to change the meaning, right? So I believe that within adaptation, it is the exact same thing. Even as we saw, even if you don't change the text, you can do something different with the costumes, with the settings. So it is a risky venture, I would say, especially if you are working with young girls in this, in Elsie Fogarty's case. But yeah, it will be interesting to see more examples. The thing is that with Elsie Fogarty's adaptations, we have all those clues, all the annotations, but there are some other adaptations that just leave it to the imagination. Like, for instance, if we go back to the 19th century and we are reading the manuscript of a play and we cannot see the actual performance, we will miss all those things. So the message is something tricky to understand from where we are at right now, I think. But I really believe that we can look at the context, the political context, and we can get an idea, or at least an assumption of what was trying, what the author was trying to convey. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure what to say after my my friend here gave you such a wonderful answer. But I think in my case it's slightly different from hers, because she was dealing with a person adapting sorry, a text. In my case, it's more like an appropriation rather, because Buffini what I felt she did was, okay, I'm going to take this general theme of a wonderland and these characters that everybody's going to recognize, and then I'm going to talk about my thing. I may be wrong. That was my personal perception. So it's a slightly different. Yeah, maybe the message was a little bit too forced, or it could have been done in a different way that was less evident but still powerful. I don't know. I don't know about that. I'm also relatively new to the world of theatre, so I'm a believer of entertainment just for the sake of entertainment, but I'm not too sure to what extent somebody goes to a specific place and expect them not to have a meaning. I think even if they go just because they want to go, they expect them to tell them something. I may be wrong, though. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, well, that's a very old discussion. Should art for art's sake, should it have a meaning, should it be didactic? I guess, and I haven't seen Wonderland, but I guess that when you go to see, I've been a teacher most of my life, so I've been to school performances, and many of them are insufferable because of the blunt message. I mean, you can't be didactic. It's not necessary to have all the time, like, I don't know, shouting, this is the message. I mean, children are not stupid, but this is something we forget. And this is something that, as I said, Brian Friel was really worried about. He didn't want to sound in any way preachy, and because in fact, he didn't have any answer. I mean, in fact, I'd say that the directors, like Ian Rickson yesterday or Caitriona McLaughlin, have a more clear message or idea than the writer himself, because he adopted, he was, as I said, he was, he represents his mind and the way he is. Okay, yeah, they're destroying our culture, but we have to adopt. Should we do this? There's only questions. If you read the play, there are only questions. But then the directors come and they do these slight changes, and you see messages that perhaps were not there, or were not there so explicitly, like this plumb line. I thought that was too much, in my opinion. I mean, well, is it necessary? But the director felt it was really important that the audience could see the threat on the culture. I'm sure that if Friel had been there, I said, no way, no, you shouldn't do that. But this is the interesting thing about theater. One thing is the script, and then the magic of it is that it can be translated so differently without altering the script, because the script is the same. But and again, as Steiner says, every translation is also treason to the original. There's also something that is corrupted, something that is lost, or something that is altered. And I think that's unavoidable. That's what you find in theater. So, well, I spoke too much. That's my.
I also have quite a big and difficult question about audiences and the ways in which audiences might be invited, involved, interactive. because I also went to see the National Theatre version of Wonder.Land, and I think I'm right in saying before you went into the auditorium, there were these kind of little interactive games and like a little virtual reality kind of game that you could do, and you could design your own little Cheshire Cat or something along those lines. And I thought that was, quite clever in terms of getting the audience to think about themselves as party to this production, as members of a game, as kind of shifting the passive audience member into something more active. And that struck me when you were talking, Vicky, about the amateur production and that kind of disturbing, as Kate says, between the binary between private and public, but also maybe between audience and actor. So I guess that's a very big, difficult reflection, but do you have any ideas about how your playwrights, your texts were invoking the audience in a way that might be more active perhaps than passive?
Thank you, Beth, for the question. We saw the notes for that she wrote for the introduction of the adaptation for Tennyson's The Princess. I think that in this case, the audience are the schoolgirls, the same schoolgirls who are performing in a way, because perhaps perhaps they change roles. And the princess was performed by an actress one day, by a schoolgirl one day, and then the other they changed roles. So perhaps they were both participating actively in the adaptation and also witnessing the play. So in this case, I think it would be interesting to, I wish we had records on the actual performances of these adaptations. I have to look into that. But we read the idea of encouraging personal reflections of what they were doing, right, of their personalities, and I think that would give us a look into how they perceived. So if I am able to be myself while I am performing a role, that means that perhaps if someone else feels like me, will identify with what I am performing on stage. Additionally, with all the stage cues that she gives, all the lighting, the costumes, I believe that they all participated in that. So I cannot conceive the theatre, even if it's just for amateur performing, I cannot conceive it as something different. I believe that there is always some kind of interaction with the audience, and there is always that immersion in the play. To me, that is essential in drama. So in schools, even if it's just a small setting and it's a private setting, that will happen even more, because you are safe, you are comfortable, and you are inclined to identify with what's going on stage. And obviously the message of those excerpts, right? They were living that through that period. So I'm sure that they were identified with all the feminist movements of the period. So it is inextricably linked. Thank you.
No, in my opinion, well, in my case, I'm thinking about translations where this play was written with an audience in mind, not with the intention of them participating, let's say, in the development of the plot, but of course, the audience was really important, because the night of the opening of the play was in Derry at the Guildhall in 1980s, at the height of the Troubles. And the mayor who was there was unionist, but the rest of the council was Republican, was nationalist, and they all clapped. I mean, that's very nicely described by Stephen Ray. I mean, the choppers, the helicopters were flying on top of them, the sense of danger. In front of the Guildhall, you have the military barracks. They've changed it out now, but they were there. I mean, people of the audience recognize all these characters. When the Donnelly twins are mentioned, everybody knew they were talking about the provost. And when Myra falls in love with Yulin, everybody remembers about the feather and tan girls. I don't know if you know about this, that Catholic girls who had love affairs with soldiers were tan and feather. I think that's expression, tan and feather, right? And many times killed. And in fact, that is the topic of Heaney's poem, Punishment. Well, North has many mentions, but Punishment is about this. Well, anyway, and this mention of exogamon and endogamon and marrying inside the tribe and outside it, everybody knew what they were talking about. So Friel was writing for a particular time, a particular audience. So the audience was at the time participant. Yeah, I have no doubt about that. Nowadays, yeah, this has been done like with traditional play, as I said, much too respectfully. I don't think the author believed this was going to be as big as it is now. So I don't think directors take the audience as much into account as he did then.
Just a small comment, and I hope it's relevant. There may be a difference on the audience involvement depending on the size of the theatre, I believe, because it's not the same. I think it's not the same performing for a small schoolroom or a school in general, or a specific audience in a reduced space than going to the Olivier. The Olivier is massive. I think what Ian said, 1,200?
1,200.
1,200 seats. And to what extent did all those 1,200 people, assuming that it was a full house, did all those 1,200 people go through that preliminary activity in the foyer? It must be difficult. And I'm not quite sure. I assume it has something to do the size of the audience. Maybe reduced audiences. It's like in a classroom, right? You're more engaging if you have like 20 students. It's not quite the same when you have 150. So in theatre, I believe it may be the same. So